What's one of the most challenging aspects of being a new winemaker in Bordeaux, especially if you're a middle-aged foreigner who is making wine for the first time? How did the Bordeaux subregion of Fronsac lose its fame after being the region favored by French royalty? And what if the only thing holding you back from a fresh start, a new project, or a major life change is you? Well, in today's episode, you'll hear the stories and tips that answer those questions in our chat with Sally Evans, author of the new memoir, Make The Midlife Move, a practical guide to flourish after 50. And it's all about her story of starting a winery in the middle of Bordeaux. By the end of our conversation, you'll discover the pivotal moment that sparked Sally's interest in learning more about wine, why Sally decided to make the transition into a wine career at age 52, how Make the Midlife Move is different from other books in the genre, the most surprising insight Sally discovered while writing her book, the most challenging part of writing it, where Bordeaux and specifically Fronsac are geographically located and how the styles of wine there differ from other subregions in Bordeaux, and what made Sally choose Fronsac when deciding to start winemaking. The story behind Sally's winery name, Château George 7, how Sally overcame the issue of Magnum bottles with no capsules that would fit them, why Sally decided to expand into making white wine, how to manage feelings of imposter syndrome, yes please, what it's like to be a British woman navigating a traditionally male-dominated Bordeaux wine world, and what it means to feel responsible for the land that you're working as a winemaker. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 332. Last week I was chatting about Canadian wines and whiskeys on CTV's Things to Know TO show. I'll share my conversation and recommendations with you now. Here we go. American wines and spirits are off the liquor store shelves due to the ongoing U.S. trade disputes. So what do you do if you're missing your favorite California Cabernet or Kentucky Bourbon? Our next guest has you covered. Joining us today is Natalie McLean, who offers Canada's most popular wine review site at nataliemclean.com. Hey, it's great to be back with you, Nicole. I'm excited to share with you some Team Canada picks for red, white, and booze. Not only is the quality of these drinks superb, but the industry also injects $20 billion into our economy every year and generates 85,000 jobs. Every bottle of 100% Canadian wine or spirits generates $100 in economic value and spin-off jobs versus only $16 for an import. So when we drink Canadian, we're literally toasting to our own economy with the perfect blend of pleasure and patriotism. Can you tell I love alliteration? Anyway, if you love California Chardonnay, try the organic On 7 Chardonnay from Niagara-on-the-Lake. The winery produces super premium Chardonnay and Pinot Noir only, and with their Chardonnay, there's just two, the Pursuit and Devotion, which I love, the obsessive nature of these folks, and they only make 250 cases a year, so they sell directly from the winery and online only. We'll put the links in the show notes for all of these wines and whiskeys. This elegant white wine offers aromas of ripe golden apple, toasty vanilla, and a hint of fresh baked brioche. The palate is rich and yet balanced with a creamy texture and vibrant acidity. Much like Canadian diplomacy, this wine manages to be both assertive and polite at the same time. I'd pair it with a caramelized onion and aged cheddar tart where the flaky, buttery pastry melts in your mouth, while the sweet onions and sharp cheese zing across your palate. If Oregon Pinot Gris is more your thing, try the Liebling Sauvignon Blanc from 4 Mile Creek in Niagara. This aromatic white wine bursts with gooseberry, grapefruit, and fresh-cut grass aromas. On the palate, it's zippy and clean, with mouth-watering acidity and a lingering finish of citrus and herbs. I pair this with a lemon grilled salmon, its crispy skin giving way to tender pink flesh, alongside a fennel and citrus salad tossed in a honey lime vinaigrette. The Sauvignon Blanc's crispness lifts the dish beautifully. Now, if you enjoy Washington Riesling, try a Riesling from Hare Winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake. This beautifully balanced Riesling offers vibrant notes of green apple, white peach, and lime zest with a distinctive mineral backbone. On the palate, it's crisp with a touch of honey that finishes refreshingly dry. I'd pair this with sizzling shrimp tacos, drizzled in zesty lime crema, nestled in warm corn tortillas with a crunchy cabbage slaw. The Riesling's crisp acidity balances the spice, while its subtle sweetness enhances the charred seafood. Now, let's move on to some reds, shall we? If you love a full-bodied California Cabernet, try Big Head Wines from Niagara-on-the-Lake. Their Cabernet Sauvignon Select offers impressive depth and structure, delivering concentrated black cherry, blackberry, and mocha notes with hints of cedar and spice. The tannins are firm yet smooth, giving it an excellent aging potential. This wine doesn't need a passport to prove its identity. It has all the confidence of a world traveler who still remembers exactly where home is. I'd pair this with slow-braised short ribs, where the meat falls off the bone after hours of gentle cooking in a rich sauce of red wine, root vegetables, and fresh herbs, the gamey sweetness of the bison complementing the wine's robust character. Now, if you're into Pinot Noir from Oregon, try Broken Stone Gamay Noir from Prince Edward County. This elegant red shows bright cherry, cranberry, and violet aromas with a hint of white pepper. Light-bodied yet flavorful, with silky tannins and a refreshing finish. I'd pair this wine with roasted duck breast in a sour cherry compote, the tart sweet sauce that mirrors the wine's fruity character. The crispy golden skin crackles as you cut through the succulent meat, served with rosemary roasted baby potatoes. And if you enjoy Washington Merlot, try Nire Cellar's Cadence, a terrific blend of Merlot, Cab Franc, and Cabernet Sauvignon from the Niagara Peninsula. This sophisticated blend offers aromas of plum, blackcurrant, and dried herbs with subtle tobacco notes, medium to full-bodied with velvety tannins and a long, elegant finish. I'd pair this with a wild mushroom and truffle risotto, where the creamy rice is slowly stirred to perfection with earthy wild mushrooms and finished with a drizzle of truffle oil, creating a luxurious dish that complements the wine's complex character. Let's mosey on over to spirits, shall we, if you're missing your Kentucky bourbon. In 1972, the 40 Creek Distillery opened in Niagara and more recently was named Whiskey Maker of the Decade at the Canadian Whiskey Awards. Their 40 Creek Copper Bowl has intense toffee aromas like bourbon, but with spicy rye notes. It's a blend of aged whiskeys made from corn, rye, and barley that then undergoes intensive oak aging for extra depth and richness. On the palate, you'll find vanilla, caramel, toasted nuts, and warming spices with a smooth, lingering finish. This whiskey embodies the Canadian spirit so perfectly, I wouldn't be surprised if it apologized for being so darn delicious. I'd pair this with maple bacon butter tarts, where the flaky pastry cradles a gooey maple filling studded with crispy bacon bits, creating a sweet and savory Canadian twist on a classic dessert. The Dunrobin Distillery near Ottawa makes Beaver's Dram Sherry wood finish. They also have a rye whiskey with a port finish and a soon-to-be-released bourbon-style corn-based whiskey. But seriously, could there be anything more Canadian in a name than Beaver's Dram? On the palate, caramel wraps around orange-scented almonds as this whiskey is finished in sherrywood casks, just as some bourbons are. The perfect pairing would, of course, be beaver tails, and I do mean the pastry, not the critter, because the latter would be just mean. Specifically, I'd go with the classic cinnamon sugar beaver tail, where the hand-stretched fried dough is crispy on the outside, pillowy inside, and dusted generally with cinnamon sugar that melts slightly from the pastry's warmth. And finally, for the grand finale, we have Canada's #1 whiskey, Crown Royal Fine Deluxe, that was created in 1939 to commemorate the Canadian visit of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, with the bottle given to them as a gift in a purple velvet bag to represent royalty, the ermine capes they wear or used to. I mean, this is living generously, isn't it? This premium whiskey is made on the shores of Lake Winnipeg and is aged in white oak barrels, giving it a nose of creamy vanilla, oak, baking spices, and butterscotch. The silky smoothness of Crown Royal Fine Deluxe makes it the perfect whiskey for any classic cocktail, like the old-fashioned or whiskey sour. You can also enjoy it neat or on the rocks. I pair it with maple-glazed pork tenderloin, where the juicy meat is roasted to perfection and then brushed with a reduction of maple syrup, mustard, and rosemary, creating a caramelized exterior that complements the whiskey's smooth character. So, when you're shopping, ask for more Canada, and let's raise our glass to our country, where our wines run as deep as our lakes and our spirits are as bold as our mountains. I really want to sing a rousing rendition of O Canada at this point, but I suppose I'll continue. All right. Links to the video of this segment, as well as the wines and whiskeys, are in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/333. You can order all of them online as well. I'm always looking for your suggestions for upcoming segments on City TV's Breakfast Television, CTV Morning Live, The Social, Global's Morning Show, and CHCH Morning Live, about drinks for spring, Easter, Earth Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day, barbecue, Canada Day. So if you have wines, spirits, beer, cocktail, mixed drinks to suggest, whether they're alcoholic or not, please let me know. Meanwhile, I'm reviewing my favorite drinks on Instagram at Natalie McLean Wine. Connect with me there. Back to today's guest. 3 of you are going to win a copy of Sally Evans' inspiring, witty new memoir, Make The Midlife Move, a practical guide to flourish after 50. I'm pleased to announce a winner of Rosemary George's beautiful book, The Wines of Languedoc, with full-color photos and maps, and that is, drumroll, John Newberger from Boston, Massachusetts. I still have 1 more copy to give away, along with 1 copy of Adam Rogers' terrific book, Full Spectrum, How the Science of Color Made Us Modern, and 2 copies of Fiona Morrison's 10 Great Wine Families, a tour through Europe, which also has full-color photos and maps. So whether you want these books for yourself or maybe to give as a gift, let me know. All you have to do is email me and let me know you'd like to win. It doesn't matter where you live. I'll choose 7 winners randomly from those who contact me at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. In other bookish news, if you're reading the paperback or ebook or listening to the audiobook of my memoir, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much, a national bestseller and one of Amazon's best books of the year, I'd love to hear from you at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. I'd be happy to send you beautifully designed, personally signed book plates for the copies you buy or give as gifts. I'll put a link in the show notes to all retailers worldwide at nataliemaclean.com/333. The paperback usually arrives within a day or 2 of ordering. The ebook and audiobook are instantly available. Okie dokie, on with the show. After an international corporate career in Paris and in the south of France, Sally Evans changed her life completely in her 50s. She founded her own winery in Bordeaux with no prior experience of wine. Her wines have garnered high scores and critical acclaim from leading wine critics and have been featured in Michelin-starred restaurants across Europe. Her international best-selling memoir, Make The Midlife Move, a practical guide to flourishing after 50, is an essential read for anyone who dreams of making a major life change. Sally provides a practical step-by-step guide, drawing from her own experience and offering valuable insights and real-life examples, and she joins us now from her home in Bordeaux. Welcome, Sally. So great to have you here with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a delight. Thank you.
All right. So, in your wonderful memoir, you write that studying wine was something that you'd always meant to do, but you never had time for. So, what was your first epiphany or moment? What was that wine that kind of turned you on to wine and made you want to learn more about it?
Well, growing up in the UK in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, wine was not really part of the culture at that time on the tables in my family. So when I had finished my studies in London, I went to live in Spain for a couple of years. And so there in my very early 20s, I tasted Rioja and I tasted white Rioja as well as red Rioja. And that really as part of the experience of living in Spain as a young woman and discovering that culture was just the most wonderful experience. So that was the start of thinking, wow, there's something special in wine. And at some point, I'm going to need to learn a bit more about it.
Where were you when you tasted that wine?
I was in Madrid.
Oh, you were in Madrid, and were you having dinner or something?
Yes, so I studied French and German at university. And so as I finished university, I thought, maybe if I'm going to be a linguist, I ought to learn Spanish. So I'm going to go to Spain. So without knowing anybody, I managed to find a job teaching English in Madrid. And I set off. It was before, obviously, mobile phones. My mum and dad waved me off, not knowing where I was going or how I was going to live. And I arrived in Madrid. And on my first night there, I booked myself into a hostel. And as I was phoning my mum on the payphone to say, I've arrived, everything's okay, a group of students and young people who were staying in the hostel saw me and saw me as the new English girl who just arrived. And they said, we're going out for dinner. Would you like to come? And so off we went. And so it was my very first night in Madrid. And one of them, who knew quite a lot about wine, ordered the Rioja and gave me my first taste. So that was it, my first night in Spain.
Magical night.
Yeah, it was very special.
So you were teaching there, you'd learned the languages, but tell us a bit about your previous career before you started and decided to make wine, and what made you make that jump into winemaking at age 52.
Okay, so after my Spanish adventure, moved back to the UK, and with my then partner, we ran a Cotswold country inn. So a very typical English inn with a restaurant and a bar and some letting rooms. And that was a great experience. And then went on a few years later to move to Paris. So I moved to Paris with my partner. I had a very small child. And so moved to France, thought it would be wonderful for him to grow up bicultural as well as bilingual. And so started my love affair with France. And while in Paris, I lived in Paris for nearly 10 years, I started working for a big consulting company in the marketing team. And I spent nearly 2 decades at that consulting company as a marketing director. And so I traveled the world a lot. I had a fantastic job, and I actually spend a lot of time away from my family because I worked long hours. That was the deal. So I had another son during that time. And so by the time my younger son was around 14, I really came to the conclusion, look, I haven't really seen him grow up. I went back to work when he was very small. That was my choice, and decided that as he was entering sort of middle teens and he would soon be leaving for university, I really wanted to spend some time with him before he left home. Call it mum guilt. I think a lot of women can perhaps identify with that. And then as he was then getting ready to leave for university 2 or 3 years later, so in the meantime, I'd been a great taxi driver for him to and from rugby. I'd made all his favorite meals. I'd kept an eye on him. I'd renovated a house. And then as he was preparing to leave for university, and at the same time, my mum had lost a lot of autonomy and she'd gone into a care home, I suddenly thought, okay, I'm going to be an empty nester. What am I going to do with my time? What is my project going to be? And that's when I really realized I can choose whatever I want to do, because both my sons at this point will have left home. My eldest son had left previously to go off to live his life. And so now, what do I really want to do? And that's when I started thinking, I'm not sure, but I'm going to start by doing those wine studies. and I'm going to engage my brain and I'm going to enjoy it and I'm going to take my time and I'm going to drink some good wine while I do it. And that was the beginning.
That was the beginning. And so then what made you jump to, well, I'm going to buy a winery or I'm going to start a winery from there?
That is the bit of the mad move, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
So as I got bitten by the bug, I had several times during my life been in hospitality. As I mentioned, I had a country inn. I also had renovated several properties. And I started looking, like I mentioned in the book, I started looking at lots of threads in my life that I'd kept coming back to. Renovating, having a vision for how something could be, creating something new, contact with people in a sociable atmosphere. And then, of course, these wine studies. And of course, also food. I absolutely love cooking, food, receiving people. So, as I started thinking about wine, I thought, that could be a project. I could look at maybe getting a rundown property, renovating it, and creating wine. And then, that goes with the food and the love of food. So I simply said to myself, so at this point, I was living near Nice in the southeast of France. So just tucked in the southeast corner near to Monaco, right the other side near Italy. And I said to myself, where do they make good wine? Well, of course, Bordeaux came to mind. I had never visited Bordeaux. And I thought, this could be a great opportunity to explore another part of France. So I packed my dog into the car and I drove 8 hours to the other side of Bordeaux and I
Wow.
bought a plot of vines.
My God, just like that on a Sunday.
That's what you do.
Yes, it's what you do, Sally. I'm not sure everybody does that, but we're going to get into the details of that. But maybe in a nutshell, how is your book, your memoir, different, say, from other books that might be similar, like Peter Mail's A Year in Provence, which comes to mind?
The book is really meant to be a very practical guide. So it's not describing my wine journey per se. What it is really walking the reader through the steps from thinking, as I did when I started my wine studies, what do I want to do next? How do I want to change my life? What are the things that are calling me? Through banishing those fears of, oh my gosh, I can't do it, and through the various steps you need to actually make the change. So it's not about my life, but at the end of each chapter, I put in the prompts of what I did and my experience in that situation. So you do get a little bit of my story, but it's really to help someone else in a practical way.
Okay, great. And what was the most surprising insight you discovered while writing the book?
I have been surprised about how passionate I am that anyone can embark on a major new chapter. It all started when people were coming to visit and I was receiving them here in the winery and I was telling them a little bit of the story. And people were saying to me, you should write a book. Oh, I would love to do that, but I could never do it. And I would spend the rest of the visit trying to make them believe that they could. And I think you can probably tell in my voice, I'm a normal woman. I did this on my own. I didn't have a man helping me or taking the lead. And I'm a normal woman with a normal background. And I didn't have tons and tons of money. And I really feel passionate that normal women can really make a big midlife change.
Wow. And what's the most interesting thing that someone has said about your book since it's been published?
Oh, well, I've had lots of compliments, obviously. I think the nicest thing, perhaps, is that people say that reading the book is as though I am standing there in the kitchen just chatting to them. I want someone to feel that I'm there as a friend. But look, I've done this. Maybe you could try that rather than some kind of authority. And I think that's a nice thing to feel, that people feel that.
Great. Absolutely. That's the connection and feeling like you're not alone. What was the most difficult part of writing the book?
Probably finding a title, I think, is very hard because I think when you're doing a book, you are so in it, you know exactly what the book is about. So actually trying to translate that into a title that will mean something. And I had so many titles. I'm not even sure I came up with the exact title. That took me a long time. It took me almost as long as writing the book.
Yeah, well, it's a title that suits the book for sure. It does explain without being overly explanatory. Let's go back to where you started. Because we have a range of listeners on the podcast from complete beginners to wine to quite knowledgeable folks. Draw us a mental map where Bordeaux is in France and then where your region is, Fronsac, where that sits.
Okay. So Bordeaux is in the southwest of France. When you look at France, it's like a big hexagon, and you've got the United Kingdom to the north, and you've got Spain sort of down to the southwest. Well, Bordeaux is in the southwest on the Atlantic coast, so heading down towards Spain. And if you've got Paris in the center, it's about 2 hours by fast train down to Bordeaux. So it is on the southwest coast, about 2/3 down on the way down to Spain. Now, Bordeaux as a winemaking region is huge. So about 100,000 hectares. Now, a hectare is about 2.5 acres. So it's a very big region. It's the biggest wine region, certainly in one piece, I believe, in Europe.
It's bigger than the Languedoc?
I believe so, yes. And certainly in terms of production, we're talking production of nearly 600 million bottles a year. That's huge.
Wow.
It's a big production. People are probably aware that, we have an appellation system, the AOC, that you find often on a bottle, which defines the geographic area. And there are 65 of them within Bordeaux. So it's a huge area. And because you have this very deep estuary coming down into the city of Bordeaux, which is obviously the way that the ships navigate to bring it in, it's a major port. And you have the two rivers. You have the Garonne, which goes down south, and then you have the Dordogne, which goes out towards the east, the Dordogne rivers. It was always has been a major port because clearly it was the first port on the west coast of the country with all the ships coming in from the Americas. A lot of the appellations in Bordeaux are classified as left bank or right bank, which is left of the, west of the estuary, or to the right, to the east of the estuary. And so on the right bank, I think one of the most well-known appellations is probably Saint-Emilion, that most people will have heard of. And on the right bank, you've got Saint-Emilion, Pomerol, and Fronsac, who are grouped together by the Bordeaux Wine Council as a trio of appellations. And I am in the lesser known one of Fronsac. So 10, 15 minutes from Saint-Emilion to the east of Bordeaux on the right bank.
And how much wine does Fronsac produce? Like, how big is it in terms of volume?
Probably about 1% of the Bordeaux production.
Oh, wow. So very small.
Very small, yes.
And that might be why it's often overlooked compared to more famous appellations?
Yes, I think because Fronsac has an interesting history in that it was very well known in the past, in that it had the first wines that were produced that went up to the royal court of Versailles, to the French royalty, which was fantastic. Mainly thanks to the fact that Richelieu, the Cardinal Richelieu, was also the Duke of Fronsac. Also in history, Charlemagne had a folly here. So that was great. But then as time went by, an area like Saint-Emilion, which became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, really overtook Fronsac in terms of notoriety. We have very similar soil. And I think that Fronsac fell behind at that time. And also the wines, when climate was a little bit cooler as well, some of the wines tended to be a little bit more rustic, maybe not quite as ripe or as elegant as they could be. And so it kind of fell behind in terms of notoriety.
Right. And what made you choose that region where you bought your property?
Because I wanted to be on the right bank. I love right bank wines, which are Merlot driven. I love that. I wanted to be near to the city so that I could have a life and get into Bordeaux in about 40 minutes. And there are some appellations which are much further away and would mean I would have been much more isolated, as I didn't know anybody here. So I wanted to be near to the city. But also, Fronsac represented at the time a really good quality terroir, soil. As you know, the French love talking about terroir, for the money. And I couldn't, frankly, afford Pomerol or Saint-Emilion. So I went for a really good value appellation, but with great potential and great soil.
A real fixer-upper, I guess.
Yes, that's it. Exactly.
Because you purchased very modest property with rundown buildings when you started. Do you think that was actually beneficial to your journey, that you had to start with those constraints, or what's your take on that now?
I think financially it's been fantastic. Contrary to what you might think, I'm very, very bad with risk. I really do not like anything that has high risk.
Really?
That doesn't, I
Wow.
know it doesn't sound
Quite the
like
move
that.
for someone who's risk averse.
So, from my perspective, what I did was I bought a plot of mature vines, 35 years old at the time. So, beautifully mature vines. They belonged to another chateau who was trying to sell off some land, and then some dilapidated buildings. And the fact that I could add value to the house. So, I bought a workers' cottage that had workers in for a long time, so it was very run down. A tractor barn, which basically just housed materials. It had no door on it. It was just a big barn with a big open doorway. And then an empty winery building that had no equipment in it. So it was empty, had never been used to make wine. So the fact that I could add value by renovating the house was really important to me, because I had in my mind, look, if this doesn't work out, you renovate the house, you continue your wine studies, you love being in Bordeaux for a short while, but you can always sell it and get your money back from renovation that you've done in the house. So that was a really important factor when I bought it. Yes.
Wow. And now Château George 7, the name of your winery, is an unusual name for a French vineyard. What's the story behind that, and how did the locals react to that?
Well, yes. So in French, it's Château George 7, so number 7. And in English, Château George 7 or George 7. It is an unusual name. So I had my marketing hat on. I wanted a name where I could get the .com, a URL, which we know is very important these days. So I wanted to be sure to be able to get the .com. And I also wanted something that reflected what I do here. So as I sat down with my piece of paper and looked at my really dilapidated, uninspiring buildings, but I looked at the most beautiful view and the wonderful old gnarly vines, I thought, okay, what I'm going to do here is a combination of old and new. So George represents an old traditional name. It works well in English and French, George, George. And 7, written that way, rather than Roman numerals, is more modern, is more forward looking. And the next King George of England will be George VII. So it has a little nod to my British origin. But also, when I lived in Paris, I worked in the Avenue Georges V. And so the Georges V, Georges VII, I felt was a nice little combination, bringing it all together.
You really do think about titles. Wow. If I write another book again, could you consult, please? That's great. I love it.
Yeah.
So you also write about making a lot of rookie mistakes. Maybe you can give us some examples of those.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. Yes, I've made a few. I've made quite a few. One of the early mistakes was when I bottled my first wine. We had ordered some magnums. So I wanted to do bottles and magnums as well as half bottles and bottles. And you buy the capsules to go onto the top of the bottle, like this, like you have on the top of the bottle. Little did I know that around the outside of the magnum, there was a band of glass, which meant the capsule wouldn't fit. So I went running around all over the countryside trying to find capsules. And I don't know who else buys those magnum bottles, but the capsules don't fit them. So I ended up having to wax my magnums, put wax around the top because I can't find capsules that fit. And when I was told, okay, well, you just get a pan and you just put it in gas burner and you just start dipping in the wax. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't keep the wax a constant temperature. So I went on Amazon and I bought a leg waxing machine. And I have fill it with the black wax and it keeps it at a perfect temperature. And I can just dip the bottles in and there we go. So, there's a solution to everything.
I mean this in the best stereotypical way. Only a woman could have come up with that solution. You remind me of Veuve Clicquot, who drilled holes in her kitchen table to riddle the bottles, champagne.
Yes.
But what an ingenious option. Oh, my goodness.
Yes. I have to add, I don't use the same machine to wax my legs, just to say.
Oh, I see. That's good. You keep them different.
Just to be sure.
What's been your most humbling moment, especially in the early days of being a winemaker?
I think the realization of just how much people around here love the land, care for the land, the responsibility to look after the soil and the land. I think that when you get into large scale farming, we see big farming, but actually most wine farmers are really looking after the land and just wanting to leave it better than they found it. And that is really humbling because it's all kind of bigger than us. And I was a bit blasé about that, I think, when I got here. And then you start feeling it as well. Like those vines are like, I feel very responsible for them. And that's very humbling.
Hmm. What was the most unexpected challenge you faced in those early days? Something that you wish someone had warned you about other than the capsules for the Magnum bottles?
Yes, I think a few things really. I was already well informed about French bureaucracy because I already lived in France. So I knew that there was a lot of bureaucracy in France, but I don't think I realized just how much the customs system and the appellation rules and all the bureaucracy there is around winemaking, how much that would be a next level. Now, don't get me wrong, all the rules about the appellation and so forth is really good because it means we're very strict around what we can and can't do, which means you know exactly what goes into the wine and you can't treat the vines so many days before you pick. So there's a lot of rules which are good, but my goodness, there was a lot of rules to look at. And also, I think, and this is a little bit of a rookie mistake, but also I kind of didn't really think through how long it takes to make a wine. It takes 2 years before it goes into bottle, the way we make it here. So we pick it, it goes into bottle. You've looked after those vines for a year before that, before you pick it. Then it goes into bottle, 2 years later, and then it's not really ready to drink for another year or so. So it's quite a long time that you're financing everything before you can actually start getting money in. And I think I probably could have done with someone to say, start with white wine. It's a much quicker turnaround for cash. But nobody did.
Start with white wines because they're ready earlier. They don't need the oak aging or
That's right.
of reds.
Exactly.
Wow. Because you did start with reds, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And then what made you get into whites eventually?
I renovated a tasting room. I renovated the famous equipment barn in 2020. It was a great year to renovate a barn for a tasting room, as we didn't know in January what was going to hit us in March in 2020. But I started the renovation in January, and I realized that if I'm going to do wine tourism well and I'm going to have people here, they're not all going to want to be tasting or drinking just a big red wine. They'll want a white wine. And so I decided to rent a parcel of vines from my neighbor to make the white wine from that point.
So you rented first to mitigate the risk. Did you eventually buy that land or?
I still rent that from a neighbor, the same parcel every year, and we have the same technical team that oversees it, and I can see it from my terrace, so I can kind of keep an eye on it.
Keep an eye on it. You mentioned that standing on the edge looking down is the worst place to be, but that if you take the plunge, the net will appear. Was there ever a moment that you thought the net wasn't there?
Well, my initial leap was to make wine from just a small part of my land. So although I only have 3 hectares, which is about 7.5 acres, I decided to start with 2 hectares. And so that was kind of my net I had put in place. But after that, I think it's really every time I've done a big investment, the decision might have taken me a while, but I think once I've made the decision, I've kind of said, right, you've got to go for it. You've got to go for it. You've made the decision. Let's do it. You've been thinking about this long enough. And so, no, I think most times making a big financial decision has always been hard, but I feel that the net has always been there and I've made the right decision and I've gone for it. It's been half doing something is not worth doing it. Put it that way.
It's true. Sliding down the slope, that's kind of hard. But you also write about the imposter syndrome, which lots of us feel, especially as women. Did you ever feel that? And how did you deal with it if you felt that?
I have, yeah. And I think that is a very female trait. I have felt that. I think when I made my first full vintage, 2018, when I got 94 points for my first wine at the Decanter World Wine Awards, I started thinking, is that right? Did they get my wine? It can't be this easy. So my first wine got that great score. And I also got picked up by an importer in the UK with my first wine before I even had it. It was finished. So yes, lots. And even now, I'm much better with it now because I feel I've earned my stripes, as it were. But yeah, absolutely. Thinking, hold on a minute. I'm not sure that's right. Yeah.
So,
So
what advice do you have for women who feel that imposter syndrome? Is it just fake it till you make it, or what do you advise women to do?
when I did get that 94 and I had that feeling, I did actually talk to the people who advised me around making wine, to external consultants here in Bordeaux. And I sat down with them saying, I'm not sure, have I earned this? And then we went through what we had done and what I had invested. And they said, do you realize what you have invested in? Those barrels that actually mean that you can start the complexity of the wine early on, which has added to this wine at a very early age. The terroir, the investment you're putting into the soil, and actually talking them through with them. Then at the end of it, I came out thinking, yeah, why didn't I get 95?
Good for
Yeah.
you. But
Yeah.
that's good advice. So you had what I call a kitchen cabinet, people, advisors, trusted advisors around you who can help ground you literally. But also, if you just look at the facts, like instead of conjuring up stories in your mind about should it this be this way or that way, if you stay with the facts and the work that you've done, then you can own, I think, those achievements.
Absolutely, because actually, what we have probably done, we have an emotional response, which is, oh, I don't know, how can that be that I've had such early success? But actually, when you look at it, you've done all the due diligence, you've put all the pieces in place, you do know the stuff, you've done your research, you've consulted the right people, you've invested the right amount, and you kind of think, yeah, you need to give yourself credit that you have actually done that. That's why you got there. So, yeah.
Absolutely. You also write about the loneliness of your journey, like especially establishing this business in rural France and being an outsider at first. How did you deal with the loneliness?
So, a couple of things. I was used to living on my own, but I had lived in a village before. So, I hadn't lived in the middle of the vines. I mean, I'm literally, my house and my property is on its own, surrounded by vines. So, the good thing was I was still studying the WSET diploma in London. So, I needed to go back and forth. So, I made sure that I made the most of those trips back to London to actually reconnect, have some city life, probably spend more money than I should have done by enjoying myself, going out, doing all kinds of things. And then actually going back to the vines was a lovely moment of peace. And I could actually really enjoy having some alone time. So that really helped. But also, of course, I am a people person. And I do find being on my own here for long periods is a hard part of it, which is why I love traveling and doing wine tastings. And so I reached out to the local community. I looked at how to volunteer, help the Fronsac appellation, get involved. Anybody new in an area, you've got to make an effort. And it's no different for me moving to a winery as it is when you go to a new city. You've got to make an effort to reach out to people. So I did. And now, I've got a great, great community here.
That's wonderful. And you talk about the importance of a contingency plan if the wine business hadn't taken off. What was your plan B?
Well, my plan B, as I mentioned, I started with a smaller plot because that meant I could buy less equipment, less capital expenditure than for the full 3 hectares. So that was a start, which meant, and it was a very manageable amount according to what I thought. So it was only 9,000 bottles the first year. And my plan was, okay, if this doesn't work, then I will give that away. I will drink some of it. I will give it to everyone for Christmas. I will give it away. And then I will rent the vines back to perhaps to the previous owner, or let them have it free of charge so it doesn't cost me anything. And the tractor barn that I had, I can just turn into a gîte or some bed and breakfast accommodation. So I always had an idea in the back of my mind, if this doesn't work, I could do that. And that was more as an emotional support, psychological support for me, I think, because doing it on my own, it felt like it was a good idea to have a backup plan. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because you just need to make yourself feel strong.
Yeah, you're not planning to fail, but you have a plan and a backup plan. So that's very important. So let's turn to some of the challenges. You do write about the challenges when you started. Of course, the Bordeaux wine world is steeped in tradition, historically male dominated. You had to navigate that as a British woman coming to winemaking later in life. Tell us about some of the people who kind of dismissed you at first, maybe starting with the real estate agent. What happened there?
Well, that wasn't particularly in Bordeaux, but I'd had that in my previous where I lived, is that the sexism that you find is that if you are visiting a property, then the estate agent tends to address a man if he's there. And I actually was visiting some properties with a friend of mine who happened to be a male. But I was the one who was buying. I was the one who had the money. And the estate agent just completely ignored me, and only spoke to the man about the plot size and about the energy and the rating and all the various things. And it was just laughable because I was the one who kept asking questions, but the answers were given to the male until my friend turned around and said, well, actually, I don't know why you're talking to me because I haven't got any money. She's the one with the money. So, you need to talk to her. But it was automatic that they would talk to the man. But another really funny one was when, well, it's not funny. I mean, it happened again 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, a lot of lorry drivers tend to be quite macho. And when obviously they know about driving their vehicle, but having had a
These
lot
are
of
truck
lorries
drivers.
here.
Lorry is your British term, right? For truck?
That's
Yes?
right, lorry.
Just
Yeah.
confirming. Yep.
So obviously, now that I have been making wine for a while, I've had a lot of trucks come into my property and I know exactly where they can turn, the biggest ones, how is best to maneuver based on what I've learned from their peers in their industry. But will they listen to me? Absolutely not. And one of the early ones who came in, I was outside weeding or doing something with the pots, and I started telling him, well, if you can move over there and then you could. He completely ignored me. He didn't want to talk to me. And then a young man that I had working in the winery came out with the hose and he was washing something down, and the driver stopped mid-sentence talking to me and turned to the young man and said, so how am I going to, how do you suggest I back this lorry up? And he was just there for the day helping in the winery, and it's like, I don't know, she's the boss, she's the owner. And this truck driver just couldn't get his head around the fact that I might know how he should do it. So I was a woman.
So I assume he's still stuck outside your house there?
Yeah. From my most recent escapade, which was just at the beginning of February, I have a big mud hole where he drove his truck in and he couldn't get out, and he had to get a neighboring tractor to pull him out because he wouldn't listen
Serves
to me.
him right. No.
There we go.
Well, that's fine. Laws of natural consequences. You won't forget that one. How about the enologist that you encountered?
Yes, that was funny. So I bought the property, and over the next couple of years, I wasn't sure about making wine. Again, I took everything step by step. I renovated the house, I carried my studies, and the vines were continued to be farmed by the previous owner. I let him have them free of charge to farm. So that way it didn't incur any costs and I didn't have to make any quick decisions before I was ready. And so he carried on farming the vines. And just in a couple of years later, when I was starting to think about taking over the vines, an enologist drove up and he said, oh, I live in the nearby village. I hear that you're looking at making wine. I can help you. Well, I started explaining what I wanted to do and what I was thinking. And it was clear that all he could see was Euro signs. And he actually said to me, can I speak to your husband about the wine? And I said, well, no, I don't have a husband. And I said to him, I really don't need your services. I'm not. And he turned around and said, well, I don't like working with women anyway. You're far too emotional. And off he went. And so, yeah, no, I saw him coming. So off he went. But yeah.
Oh, he sounds like the emotional one. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Sally. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, what's one of the most challenging aspects of being a new winemaker in Bordeaux, especially if you're a middle-aged foreigner who's making wine for the first time? Well, Sally notes that she didn't realize just how much bureaucracy there was in France with the customs system and the appellation rules around winemaking. As she says, you need to know exactly what goes into the wine and what you can't treat the vines with so many days before you pick. She acknowledges there's a lot of rules which are very good, but there are just so many of them. She also didn't really think through how long it takes to make a wine. It's 2 years before it goes into the bottle, then it's not ready to drink for another year or two. So it's quite a long time to finance everything and to have all that inventory tied up before you actually start earning money. Number 2, how did the Bordeaux subregion of Fronsac lose its fame after being a region favored by French royalty? Sally observes that Fronsac has a fascinating history. It had the first wines that were produced and went up to the royal court of Versailles, the French royalty, mainly thanks to the fact that Cardinal Richelieu was also the Duke of Fronsac. Charlemagne also had a folly there, so that was great, she says. And then as time went by, though, an area like Saint-Emilion, which became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, overtook Fronsac in terms of fame. They have very similar soil types, but she believes that Fronsac fell behind since then. When climate was a little cooler as well, some of their wines tended to be a little bit more rustic, shall we say. Maybe not quite as ripe or elegant as they could be. Of course, the wines are improving since then. And number 3, what if the only thing holding you back from a fresh start, new project, or major life change is you? Sally was surprised that anyone can embark on a major new chapter if they have the passion for it. When people visited the winery, she told them a bit of her story, and they would say to her, "You should write a book," to which she responded, "I would love to do that, but I don't think I could. I'm a normal woman with a normal background. I didn't have tons of money, and now I really feel passionate that normal women can make a big midlife change." And so she wrote a book about it. Go, Sally, go. In the show notes, you'll find the full transcript of my conversation with Sally, links to her website, book, and wines, the video versions of these conversations on Facebook and YouTube Live, and where you can order my book online now, no matter where you live. If you missed episode 115, go back and take a listen. I chat with Jane Anson about her award-winning book, Inside Bordeaux. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite. You've also mentioned that 70% of wine in Bordeaux used to be white or sweet. So was it the British influence that caused the flip to the red?
I love that question. So those 300 years when it was English, it was mainly red. The English basically preferred red wine, drank more red wines. The switch in Bordeaux came after the English left, when the Dutch came, because the Dutch have always been much more interested in white wine. But then from 1972 or 3, it switched to red. And today Bordeaux is 90% red wine. We tend to think of Bordeaux as being such a kind of traditional, unchanging region. But then just that one statistic tells you Bordeaux is perfectly capable of changing and adapting to what consumers want.
Oh, that's a great insight to draw from it. And the fact that they remain outward focused with an international focus.
You're right. That's a really good point.
You won't want to miss next week when we continue our chat with Sally. If you liked this episode or learned even one thing from it, please email or tell one friend about the podcast this week, especially someone you know who'd be interested in learning more about starting your own winery or dream project. It's easy to find the podcast. Just tell them to search for Natalie McLean Wine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, their favorite podcast app, or they can listen to the show on my website at nataliemclean.com/podcast. Email me if you have a sip tip question, if you'd like to win one of 7 copies of books by Sally, Adam, Fiona, Rosemary, or if you've read my book or are listening to it. I'd also love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. In the show notes, you'll find a link to take a free online food and wine pairing class with me called the 5 Wine and Food Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever at nataliemclean.com/class. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/332. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week, perhaps a Bordeaux with a fascinating backstory like Château George 7. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.